The New Quantum Era,
a podcast
by Sebastian Hassinger
and Kevin Rowney.
Hey, welcome back. Hey, it's been a little while. We've both been out on some sort of vacations, some work obligations. Deepest apologies for not getting back to you all sooner. We love this gig. It's just so fun. And we've got plenty of good guests queued up here. I mean, Sebastian, the pipeline's looking pretty good, yeah?
It is, yeah. I mean, I think in part, as you said, there was some business travel, there was some vacation that got in the way, but most importantly, I didn't quite realize how much the academic calendar was going to require loading the pipeline up in advance. But after this lull, we do actually have a really nice pipeline, a bunch of really interesting guests that we're lining up logistically for conversations through the rest of the summer. So we'll get back to biweekly, as much as we can. Obviously, we can't always be super punctual as this is a hobby, a side gig for us. But the nice thing is, that one big chunk of my travel was in Europe. And we lined up a bunch of, I got to meet a bunch of European researchers who I wouldn't have met in person otherwise. And that's a big part of our pipeline will be those guests.
Fantastic. I mean, just in case it isn't clear already, I mean, it does feel, right, that the idea, the meme, right, of quantum computing, it's becoming more and more prominent, more and more widely acknowledged as a big deal. Like, I just as an example, within pop culture, you probably on Netflix watch a Black Mirror, yeah?
Yes. Joan is Awful?
Yeah, and so there's that Joan is Awful, that great episode,
yes.
Right, where there's the key elements of plot, right? We don't want to do any spoilers, but there's, a device that looks just like, one of those chandelier quantum computers.
Well, yeah, and in fact, they coined a new term for a quantum computer. They called it a quam-puter with an M, which I thought was a very strange choice. In the subtitles, it's spelled a Quam puter.
Oh, I didn't see that part. Oh, yeah, cool. So anyway, if you haven't seen that episode yet, you're in our audience. I strongly recommend. Good times.
Yeah. And I think, that's a big motivation for us, other than the fact that we love this stuff, is for doing the podcast is trying to add to the discourse in a way that's hopefully clarifying, because it's so easy to get confused with this stuff.
And carried away with the fiction.
Baffling.
Yeah.
Right. Some of the marketing can be a little bit misleading because, the tech world's got a long tradition of faking it till you make it. And when you're maybe, a little bit of smoke and mirrors about a topic that's so esoteric and so deeply, profoundly mathematical and physics related in nature, and really science, not engineering, it can be very hard to figure out what's fact from fiction.
Hard to see with clarity, right? The truth of the power of the future power of these systems. Yeah.
And so the quam-puter in Joan is Awful, we'd like to tell our listeners, not real. In case there's any doubt.
But no spoilers, but yes, exactly.
Don't worry.
It ain't real.
And so this week, I think, I'm super excited. This is one of these European researchers I met during my European travels, Leo Kouwenhoven. He's been an instrumental figure in the research and development of what's referred to as topological qubits, based on Majorana
Such a cool topic. So it's going to be good.
Talk about exotic and esoteric. This is diving right into the heart of, very, very advanced fundamental science that they're trying to harness into, or transform, develop into something that we can engineer systems using this extremely exotic set of principles of nature. To great effect for quantum computers that maybe someday will make Joan is Awful a reality.
Yeah. I mean, if nothing else, very powerful commercial potential, but also, some of the most difficult science going down on there. So it's a cool frontier.
Absolutely. So I really enjoy the conversation with Leo, and I hope our listeners do as well. So here we go. Okay, we're joined today with a very special guest, Leo Kouwenhoven from the TU Delft, Technical University of Delft. He's a professor there of physics and has been engaged in some extremely interesting research for a number of years into Majorana qubits. Leo, I mean, we're really interested in hearing people's stories, how they got into quantum computing. It's never a straight path because as a field, it's still an amalgam of a number of different scientific and technical disciplines. And so, yeah, it would be great to hear from you, like how you what your path was in physics and how you decided to jump into quantum computing in particular.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Sebastian and Kevin, to having me on the show and having this discussion. I guess my start started when I was a student, and as a master's student, we were doing research in an area that was called Mesoscopic Physics. And at the time, we tried to make small devices that started to show some quantum phenomena in their electrical properties. So maybe due to confinement, so you make a wire that is very narrow, and then if it's narrow enough that it starts to show quantum confinement, then there's some effect in the electrical properties. And that went actually pretty well. And after a few years, we started to make quantum dots. And quantum dots are these small boxes defined in some material that can hold a fixed number of electrons. And you can start to play games with these electrons that you keep fixed in your little box. So you can look at the spin states. You can put two boxes together and form a double box. And it turned out to be very similar. I mean, the analogy with atoms is striking. So these were also coined artificial atoms because you start filling these boxes with electrons. They obey certain rules like Hund's rule that we know from atomic physics. The symmetry of the system plays an important role. And at some point, and this was mid-90s, we made these circular, flat quantum dots that you could fill with electrons starting from zero, and from that you could construct a periodic, like an artificial periodic table of flat atoms. And much of the physics that we know from the normal 3D atoms in the periodic table, full shells, etc., also have their analogy in 2D flat atoms. And it was kind of, at the time, it was fun to do those experiments and be able to show the correspondence between these artificial and normal atoms. And fun, fun for the following reason, because we had no idea whether it could ever have an application. I mean, at that time of Mesoscopic physics, we were doing things because they were interesting fundamentally.
Pure science.
It was pure science, and sometimes people ask me, "Hey, why are you doing it? What is the application? What can you do with it?" And I don't think we had an idea. Mid-90s, it was curiosity-driven, fundamental academic research, and we went from one nice paper to another nice paper, but not with some long-term goal.
And were you aware of sort of the work that was going on in theoretical quantum computing at that point? I mean, obviously, David Deutsch had written his paper at that point, and Shor's, by the mid-90s, Shor's algorithm was known. My sense is in the mid to late 90s, there was this sort of increasingly urgent search for like how do you make a qubit, basically, right? There was the NMR experiments and early superconducting experiments by 97. So was that in your mind at all when you were making these 2D atoms?
Well, slowly. And, we heard about it and, you hear a talk about it, and people in ion traps were, I think, the first to actually do something concrete. But for us, I think the game started in 1998, because that was the year that Daniel Loss and David DiVincenzo wrote their proposal on spin qubits. And it was closest to the technology that we had developed. And their idea was actually very simple. I mean, for the single qubit, the idea was, put a single electron in a quantum dot, and then its spin forms a two-level system, apply magnetic field. So you have a level splitting. The spin forms a two-level system, and that's your qubit. Very straightforward, very natural two-level system that can be used as a qubit. Maybe less straightforward was their idea for a 2-qubit gate. In that case, they said, okay, bring 2 quantum dots close together. So the electrons can actually hop back and forth between these 2 quantum dots. That forms an exchange interaction between the 2 spins on the 2 dots. And that exchange interaction creates a 2-electron system. And we know these as singlets and triplets. And doing this exchange interaction for a certain amount of time, you could do a 2-qubit operation. And together, the single spin in a quantum dot and the 2 spins in 2 quantum dots with an exchange interaction form this universal set of gates. So in principle, that would be enough to build the complete quantum computer. So that was a big motivation for people in the field to say, oh, hey, we had those quantum dots and we put single electrons in there. Maybe let's try and let's try to make a qubit based on a single spin. Now, the ideas were simple, but there was still, I think, one missing link, and we struggled with the missing link for maybe 5 years or so, 4 years, 5 years. And that was how to measure a single spin. The magnetic moment of a single spin is tiny, and it's basically impossible to measure. So you would be able to maybe make your qubit. Definitely, it was possible to make a single electron with a spin, but to do a rotation and measure the result of that rotation, you would have to be able to measure an individual electron spin. And I remember that in 2000, I did a sabbatical at Harvard, and mostly with Charlie Marcus at Harvard. And we started to think about we should really do this. We have those quantum dots, so we should get going. We wrote a proposal, actually a proposal that got awarded, and everything was fine. All the ideas were good, except for the readout. If I look back on our proposed idea for reading out a single spin, it was the silliest idea that you can imagine. We basically had no idea. We made a little drawing with colors and I don't know, silly. We had no idea. But I don't know, the agency didn't either not notice the silliness, or they thought it was fine, or they awarded the proposal and we got started. And I think that the important thing of getting started is that you get together a little group, you build up a little group on the topic. So some new students, postdocs, and they start thinking about these problems 24/7 and discussing it together. And step by step, ideas get better, ideas improve. And all together, the whole group together, and also in collaboration with other groups nearby, we figured it out. We knew how to measure a single spin. Convert the spin to charge, and charge is easy to measure. And if you have, let's say, one charge state that corresponds to a spin up, and the other one will spin down, then you have your signal. So in the end, it actually it works out very well with very high fidelity, this type of readout. But it's also good to realize or remember that when we started, we had no idea how to do this.
DiVincenzo, in the original research, he had to have some form of measurement to verify the outcomes and the results. So what was the transition between that era and the one that you pioneered?
It's good that you mentioned it. I don't recall a good scheme for measuring the spin. And actually, we also talked during those years a lot with particularly Daniel Loss. There were ideas like, use a material that has spin-orbit interaction, and then you can, bend one spin in one direction and another spin in another direction. But those ideas, I now call silly, because you cannot do them on a single electron. You really need a stream of electrons and collect a current in order to get a signal, and that you would have to do your qubit operation many times.
Well, and I guess that's the advantage of the superconducting qubit is you've got a large number of electrons in the circuit that you're manipulating as a single synthetic atom, but it's a larger group, so you have less to. I mean, it's still difficult to do readout on superconducting qubits. It's more straightforward, though.
No, that's true. If you think of those circulating flux qubits in superconductors,
a quasi-particle.
The collective motion of those Cooper pairs, generate a magnetic moment together that is actually measurable. It's much larger than an individual electron spin. The magnetic moment of an individual electron spin is too small to measure. So that's
So that's got to be one of the major advantages of a quasi-particle architecture, right? Yeah.
for the superconductors, you mean?
But it seems like in general, I mean, any kind of architecture based upon a quasi-particle and a larger swarm of electrons that have an isomorphic behavior to a quantum state, perhaps its measurability is easier.
Yeah, but it always comes with a price. I think everything comes with a price.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, a quasi-particle, by definition, means it is an object that interacts strongly with many others. It starts to,
Yes, yes.
show independent behavior as a quasi-particle, but it is the result of all these interactions. And if those interactions change for some reason, I don't know, then some of these properties of a quasi-particle also change. So I think it comes with a price. I think if I would have to bet my money, I think I would rather spend it on a sort of something that is really fundamental and natural, like solid, like a spin of an individual electron, than on a collection of quasi-particles or qubits. I don't know. It always
It's
comes
a
to
good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. That seems like a universal truth, actually.
Yeah, everything. Yeah, nothing comes for free. Nothing comes for free.
Nothing comes for free.
Yeah. But anyways, we were able to make those qubits, those spin qubits. And what was interesting is that we worked together with Charlie Marcus and also Saigo Tarucha in Japan. And all our three groups were able to, as soon as we figured out how we could make those qubits very quickly in all these three different groups, and it looked pretty good. Pretty good, except the coherence was not so great. So the qubits were, you could see that there was a qubit and coherent rotations, etc. But the coherence times was 10 nanoseconds or maybe 100 nanoseconds, but in that range. And we tried some improvements. We tried some different materials, but it didn't really get much better. And it became clear that if you have a single spin in a semiconductor box, then you really need the material of that box to be free of nuclear spins. Otherwise, the nuclear spins of the atoms that form the crystal form a path where the single electron spin can interact with hyperfine interaction and loses its quantum state, or it decoheres through that. So that was I kind of sort of gave up on that, and I didn't have that new material. I didn't have you need silicon that is purified, isotopically purified. Silicon 28 doesn't have nuclear spin, so you want to purify it through that isotope. Nowadays, also people use germanium, which is also a group 4 element that can be purified. And since then, this is the last decade or so, people have made enormous progress. I mean, these coherence times have gone up by a factor of 1,000 or 10,000 or so, and people run spin qubits with 3 or 4 nines fidelities. I believe also the 2-qubit gate has 3 nines. So yeah, it has become a very reliable and working qubit system. So
yeah, this is such an interesting detail, right, of the history of I had no idea that essentially the composition of the enclosure would be such a primary factor, right, in the quality of qubits. So you're saying silicon and germanium, is it because of their atomic structure, or is it just the purification across different isotope types? What is the feature of silicon or germanium here that is so powerful?
Yeah, so they come in this group 4 in the periodic table. And before we were using 3-5 semiconductors like gallium arsenide and indium arsenide and so on. And those 3-5 elements don't have isotope with 0 nuclear spin. Whereas in the group 4, both silicon and also germanium have those isotopes. So if you're able to purify natural silicon to silicon 28, you've gone away with all your
the
nuclear
entire
spins.
Enclosure is free of that interference. Yeah,
exactly. So that's how you clean up the environment. And this immediately had huge success. I think first experiments came from the US. I think it was HRL, And they, it was like, I don't recall the exact number, but maybe a factor of 100 improvement in the coherence time. So everybody jumped on those nuclear-free materials since then. But we actually, we started to do something else, and something else actually became quite successful, which was mesoscopic superconductivity. Actually, I had a postdoc who thought that making qubits was too much engineering. He wanted to do something more fundamental. So now we think qubits are fundamental, right? But no. There were also some people thought, that's just engineering. And he started to combine semiconductors with superconductors and try to induce the superconductivity into the semiconductor and have the best of both worlds. So, for instance, if you take whatever semiconductor, we've been working mostly with indium arsenide as a semiconductor. That's a good one for this type of experiment, or indium antimonide. And you use a superconductor like aluminum, and you put the aluminum right on the semiconducting wire. Then if the electrical contact between wire and superconductor is a good contact, so electrons can actually, from the semiconductor, move a little bit into the superconductor, and vice versa. The Cooper pairs from the superconductor can go a little bit into the semiconductor. Then they start to hybridize. They can be converted, Cooper pairs can be converted into electrons and vice versa. And they start to form a hybrid system that still has the properties of the semiconductor, as well as the superconducting properties.
That's quite an intellectual leap, even to sort of conceive of that kind of a hybrid system is really, really interesting.
I think it is, and people were already actually working on this mesoscopic superconductivity in the 90s, but with, let's say, moderate success. But when we started to do it in the 2000s something with new semiconductors, they were called the nanowires, it just worked out perfectly. And so we could use the field effect in semiconductors. So in transistors, you have the field effect to switch on and off the transistor. So in this case, we could switch on and off the superconductivity that you induce in the semiconductor with just a gate electrode and applying a voltage to a gate. And actually, there was we were sort of lucky in the sense that because now I'm going to move to the Majorana story, because there were already some ideas about Majoranas, and there was a paper from Alexei Kitaev to make a Kitaev chain. There were works on the fractional quantum Hall effect, where people say that certain fractions in the fractional quantum Hall effect, notably the 5/2 fraction, that particular fraction, could be viewed or could be mapped on a superconducting model, and the superconductivity would be a weird topological superconductor, which they call the P-wave superconductor. So those ideas, very difficult to verify, and again, I listened to the talks on that topic in those years, but first of all, I thought it was very difficult to grasp, to really understand what they were saying, and what was really the essence of it. And second, I couldn't see a practical way of making a device and really, get everything out of it, and really, control it, and play the games, make a qubit out of it, etc. I just didn't see it. But in 2010, there were two groups who changed the ideas into something more practical by using a nanowire covered with a superconductor. So basically, exactly what we had already done in those years before, except for one thing: you had to turn on a magnetic field. We had never turned on the magnetic field, and in this proposal, you have to turn on the magnetic field. And these groups were what we now call the Orag-Luchin proposals, or there was a specific proposal using these nanowires with a superconductor. Now, turning on a magnetic field by itself is very simple. You just turn on the field. But it turns out that in the system of a superconductor and semiconductor, it changes everything. A superconductor wants to stay at zero magnetic field. Cooper pairs come as a singlet state. So they have one spin up and one spin down. And if you start applying magnetic field, they both want to be in the same spin direction. Whereas in the semiconductor, if you apply a magnetic field, the electrons do want to have the same spin. They start to polarize. They align with the magnetic field, parallel to the magnetic field. So they want to be aligned. So Qubit pairs don't want to be aligned. Electrons in the semiconductor do want to be aligned. So this hybridization of converting Qubit pairs into normal electrons becomes difficult because one has spin up and spin down, and the other one is 2 spins up, for instance. But finally, the solution for this sort of mismatch was using materials, semiconductor materials, that also have a strong spin-orbit interaction. And that's one of those condensed matter interactions in solids, that if a spin moves through the lattice of a material, then its spin and its orbit become coupled. And in particular, in elements that are a little heavier, so not the ones at the top rows of the periodic table, but ones that are a little bit lower, they start to get an appreciable spin-orbit interaction. Spin-orbit interaction basically rotates the spin. So if an electron moves through a crystal of indium antimonide, then over a certain distance, typically a few hundred nanometer, the spin rotates. It just rotates from up to down. And that solves this mismatch between Cooper pairs of spin ups and down and electrons with 2 spins up. Because if they move through the crystal, they rotate, and at some point they can match up to the other. And this was what these two groups predicted and proposed. They use a heavy spin orbit material, cover it with a superconductor, apply a magnetic field. The spin orbit interaction makes sure that the magnetic field, on the one hand, polarizes the spins in the semiconductor, but doesn't kill the superconductor. And you can still convert Cooper pairs into normal electrons and then make this hybrid system.
It's such a puzzle box to solve, right? It's like,
my God, no doubt. Yeah, so deep, really challenging.
On an insanely small scale. Like,
and I wonder, just for the benefit of our audience, this is just fascinating material, it really is. But this is an entire research agenda with so many people engaged. Heading for this, I gather, right? This Majorana fermion, perhaps constructed as a quasi particle. Is that the sort of was that a clear research agenda destination? Yeah,
absolutely. Since these proposals in 2010, it became a clear research agenda. It was sort of spelled out what to do exactly.
Yes. And I guess it's also just for the benefit of our audience, it feels like two parallel tracks in terms of the merit, the power of the outcomes down this path. One is, finding, experimental evidence of the existence of Majorana fermions. It could be really powerful outcomes. I'm not sure if even the fundamental particle itself has been found yet. Is that accurate? A standalone Majorana fermion, has that been found yet?
No, it's not been found.
But as a quasi-particle, manifesting it that way, still incredible power, right?
I think so. It's fundamental physics, and it has some properties that are very unique. Like the Majorana quasi-particle, we usually call them Majorana zero modes to distinguish them from the Majorana fermions that could fly around in space. Maybe neutrinos could be Majorana fermions, but the Majorana zero modes have some more exotic properties than those fermions, Majorana fermions. Maybe the Majorana fermions are also exotic. They have not been found, so they must be exotic.
That's by definition, that's exotic.
But you would not be able to make a qubit out of those cosmic Majorana fermions. So the whole idea of topology and topological qubits come from the special properties of Majorana zero modes in solids.
And again, just for the narrative of the benefit of our audience, it feels like those topological properties could have the second axis of the merit of this avenue of the research is the applications around, I guess, quantum error correction and similar better maintenance of quantum state during computation. Do I have that right?
No, absolutely. And the motivation, definitely in those years, was to build a fault-tolerant qubit. So a qubit that has intrinsic protection built in at the single physical qubit level, and then you're free to go to many and scale up.
Yes, and you would then dispense with all of the other highly complicated quantum error correction methods and algorithms, and just have a stable qubit to begin with.
Yeah, so in the ideal case, theoretically speaking, you wouldn't need error correction. Of course, in practice, in practice,
In practice, you're going to use it, yes, of course, right? But it just gives you a huge jump, a head start, right?
yeah.
And that it protects against phase flips and bit flips.
There are very efficient schemes against phase decoherence, and the bit flips are basically they're quantized. I mean, but I think we have to take a step back, because the question is, do we have those Majoranas at this very moment? Have they been measured? We did report a paper in 2012 with the signatures of Majoranas, and they are supposed to be at zero energy. And indeed, we found a nice resonance peak at zero energy that was predicted to be the signature for a Majorana bound state. Other groups reproduced it, and at some point, everybody had zero bias peaks as signatures. But slowly, it also became clear that non-Majorana reasons, trivial reasons, could also lead to a very similar measurement outcome, a peak of zero bias. Even disorder, or if your potential, because we basically have some kind of particle in a box potential here, if the box has smooth walls instead of hard walls, the smooth walls could also induce a zero energy state. That from the outside, if you cannot look inside, if you can only look from the outside in a spectroscopy measurement, looks exactly the same as a true Majorana zero mode. So after years of optimizing the samples, the devices, making the materials cleaner, making sure that the fabrication doesn't contaminate things, the peaks got better and better, higher and higher. But at the same time, it became clear that not just the topological Majoranas give these signals, but also disorder, plain disorder, or smooth potentials can also lead to totally trivial Majorana bound states. Or sometimes maybe we should even avoid using the word Majorana for these trivial states, but
A profile resembling this the same, yeah.
exactly. I mean, even in simulations, we wouldn't be able to distinguish the two unless you know what your parameters are in the simulation, of course.
Sure, yeah, right.
So that actually put everybody, on a hold. Like, okay, well, how to get out of this? Seemingly a sort of a trap or so, or it's almost like a catch-22. Like, how do you get out of this catch-22?
And so it feels like, again, the potential is so huge, both in terms of theory and application. The obstacle is obviously very, very stern. This is a hard target to take on. What's your sense right now about the prospects for these avenues of inquiry and research?
The last 3 years, we've changed to a slightly different measurement technique, where you not only measure those Majoranas with the zero bias peaks, but there's a technique where you also can measure inside in the bulk. It's what we call a non-local measurement technique. You're still measuring currents and voltages, but you can do a correlation between the measurement of the two ends of the wire, where you expect to see the Majorana zero modes, as well as a measurement of the bulk, where there should be a topological gap. And the topological gap should be the thing that protects you against noise and so on. And we've done some measurements, actually, I would say high quality data measurements of these measurements, but not with a positive correlation. We couldn't conclude, hey, those peaks or those gaps in the bulk are related and completely consistent with Majorana zero modes. Now, there was another paper from Microsoft that just got published last month. And I worked at Microsoft until about a year ago, more than a year ago. But the paper that got published on this with reporting a positive correlation of these different measurements came out last month in PhysRFB. And it's a long paper with lots of checks and balances. I think the claim can definitely be made that what they observe is consistent with a topological Majorana zero modes. It is always very difficult to completely rule out other options.
Sure. Yeah, it could
we
be
don't
a
know.
rerun of the same concern, right, from the first discovery.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I think what would be a next step, and what would be a very clear demonstration, would be to make a qubit out of it. Because these Majoranas have some very peculiar properties and that go under the name non-abelian statistics. and if you can show non-abelian statistics with these Majoranas, then you know that you have the right ones.
Yeah, that would be the proof in the pudding, right? If we could actually get an operating qubit with those characteristics, then there's no way that that's not, what it seems to be.
Yeah, or you could even argue, well, I don't care if these are Majoranas or not. What I care about,
right. If they exactly.
Statistics.
Certainly, it is. Yeah. So Leo, is it hazardous? Is it possible to try to, for the benefit of our audience, a general audience, to
no problem.
attempt to take that on? This is non-abelian statistics. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. No, because there's we basically know that all particles in the universe are either fermions or bosons. And the way to verify that is if you have two fermions and you exchange their positions, and you do it once more, so you really rotate them around each other, you come back to the same state. That's also true for bosons. Fermions in between have a minus sign, bosons don't, but fermions, okay. If you do it twice, they get to the same state. The non-abelian, not. So the non-abelian statistics to return to the same state, you have to do it 2 times more. So you have to exchange them 4 times or 2 complete cycles to get back to the same state. And that's a property that those Majorana zero modes have. And if you can verify that by braiding, we call it braiding. So to move them around each other, we call it braiding. So if you braid them and you see that the result of these braids follow these non-abelian rules, then you have something fantastic. I mean, you can either make a qubit or because this braid is also the gate operation. It's a gate operation if you think of the Bloch sphere. It's a gate operation that brings you from, let's say, the North Pole to the equator, and the equator is then the superposition of being up and down. And it's precise. So one braid is really, to the equator, not, a little bit off the equator. No, it's really exactly at the equator. So that's the fault tolerant operation where you don't make a mistake. That's sort of the promise of a fault tolerant braid. And it also doesn't matter if the braid is very small in space, that you move them just around each other, or a larger space between them. Actually, the larger is better, but at some point the distance between them is so large that they don't know of each other's existence, except that they have been braided.
This is so helpful. Thank you. So, is it then fair to say that other architectures that perhaps would compete with this Majorana approach? I mean, they're finding an approximate midpoint, right, between the North Pole and the South Pole of the Bloch sphere. Is that an accurate summary?
Exactly. And the other systems, spin qubits and superconducting qubits, are somewhat different because there you define 2 qubit levels with an energy difference in between. And you use some kind of microwave signal to go from, let's say, one state to the other, from the ground state to the excited state. With these Majorana qubits, the 2 states are actually degenerate. These are 2 states at the same energy. It's a degenerate ground state. So you don't use some high frequency pulse, or you don't kick the system or whatever. You just slowly braid them around each other. And in terms of these ground states, you rotate from one ground state into the other. And this can be done slowly. I mean, adiabatically. So you don't have to do things fast. As long as you complete the braid, you end up at the equator exactly. Whereas with the normal qubits, conventional qubits, your pulse has to be, finely shaped to make it very close to the equator.
That's interesting. It's that precision you're talking about makes it sound more like a digital system rather than an analog system, right? Or it's like it's a tick of a clock rather than all over the place volume knob.
Hysteresis exactly on the state. Yeah.
No, these operations, indeed, they are digital. I mean, that's how I would describe them, and that definitely has advantage for the control. So I must say that these are the let's say one group of gate operations that you need to do for universal computing. There's also another one which involve these phases, and those phases can have errors, and you need for those errors you need some kind of cleanup protocol to make them also exact, and there are efficient cleanup protocols to do that. But the quantized rotation, the braid, or the topological braid operation, is not yet sufficient for full universal quantum computing.
But on the way, yeah.
Yeah, a part of it. I mean, it protects you against errors for those Clifford gates, those class of gates.
And so this might be an unfair question to ask because I mean I can tell you're such a dedicated researcher in this domain. So you have a fundamental optimism about the future. But I mean, would you care to speculate on the time frame for the appearance of commercially viable outcomes in this domain? I mean, this is so speculative as a question, but still, I'm just burning to know.
Well, I mean, I must admit that I used to be more optimistic than I am right now.
Hard road. It's a steep climb, this one, no doubt. Yeah.
When did we start? In 2000 or so, when the whole community started working on this, we had the Di Vincenzo criteria. You make a qubit and you make initialize, and then we were motivated by the arguments of asymptotic scaling. If something scales good, then in the asymptotic limit, you have quantum advantage. And that was sort of the motivation that we had. Of course, we knew that there were unknowns, and we could have hope for, hey, those unknowns are probably not so difficult to solve, or maybe difficult to solve. We didn't know. And definitely at that time, I was super optimistic and thinking, problems are there to be solved. They only exist to be solved. And people in classical electronics also solved all their problems. So why can't we?
Exactly. Why not?
Yeah.
But I think it's a little bit more difficult. And I think what we've learned in those past 20 years is that with quantum, it really does not come for free. There's nothing is easy peasy. It's all complicated. And if you want to run, a useful algorithm, NISQ probably doesn't do it. So we have to go to error-corrected systems, and then you need 1 million qubits, and it's all analog controlled. That's a an amazing challenge. So
it is. It sometimes I get almost overwhelmed with the idea of we're at this stage where making one well-functioning qubit is this incredible challenge, and then I think as you said, then we'll need 1 million of them. It's quite in some ways, as you said, classical electronics solved their problems for classical computing, and sometimes it feels like we're in some sort of early, pre-monolithic solution, pre-printed circuit kind of era in quantum. And then other times I think there was no challenge during the classical emergence of the classical computing era that can be seen as even remotely as challenging as anything that we're trying to do in quantum. As you said at the very beginning, I mean, the scale is so minuscule, right? I mean, it's like you're describing it as a box with one electron in it. It's like that's kind of it's overwhelming when you think about how audacious that goal is to make an engineered system at that scale.
Yeah, I think we got used to that, and I think. We don't think that's our biggest problem. I mean, the machinery for nanolithography, nanofabrication has developed so fantastically that we can make small boxes. People can make small things, but in the case of Majoranas, you have to get rid of the disorder at an extreme level. almost to the point where every atom in your system is at the right place. Nobody can be, absent, so there cannot be vacancies in the material. At the interface of the superconductor, the atomic row of the semiconductor must fluently go into the atomic row of the superconductor. No mismatches. It has to be very precise, and that's that's an enormous challenge to accomplish that. Definitely on a large scale. So maybe we can make 1 qubit. Maybe we can see a Majorana, but to go from there to a large scale Majorana quantum computer, it will take a lot of technology development. Amazing.
Yeah, it really is amazing. It's so powerful and inspirational. The intersection between the deep and powerful theory and also the commercial application at the same time. It feels rare to be, in the moment with that's such an intersection. So it's just fascinating work, really is.
No, and that still motivates me. I do feel that the big goal of a topological quantum computer is sort of moving away further into the future. But the physics of these topological systems in the Majorana zero modes even gets more interesting. I mean, it's mysterious, and it could, if we can get over that first hurdle, then I think we can touch upon some really fundamental physics.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's so interesting to me as well. That as Kevin put it, the sort of the commercial goals are clear, but they aren't the only reasons to motivate this work. The fundamental science has value in and of itself, and we're learning so much by challenging ourselves to build these systems, right? And even I've seen. I feel like the neutral atom systems that have matured over the last couple of years, from cold quanta, QEra, Pascal, and others, they are in a way the first realization of kind of Feynman's vision from 1981 of, if you want to simulate a natural system, you need a quantum computer to do it. They're analog, but they are simulating many body problems, Hamiltonians, at a scale and with a fidelity that you can't do classically, because classically you're going to be approximating things, and the challenge of that approximation explodes exponentially the larger the system is. And you have 256 atoms in a QEra array. There are larger arrays being built now. Those are really complex systems to simulate classically. So I mean, I guess I wonder, like, do you think there's sort of, is there anything that we should be doing differently or pursuing differently, just from that perspective of, like, can we build machines that can help us simulate the dynamics, the quantum systems that might help us understand more what the challenges are in the Majorana qubit?
Yeah, it's a good question. And you could also think about machine learning. That's actually something that people do very actively. I mean, machine learning is used very actively to select out topological insulators. So that's another class of topological materials. And I think people just run their machines and they spit out topological insulator chemical formulas, very frequently. There must be thousands by now. And I think, despite the fact that it's so hard to realize a Majorana qubit, the underlying physics is actually not so complicated. It's what we call single particle physics, mostly, together with superconductivity. That's not single particle, but you have a superconductor. We have the theory for the superconductivity, but then the semiconducting part is basically single particle physics, which you can run and solve efficiently on a classical computer. There's no need for a Rydberg array or some other ion trap quantum computer to simulate it. There's really no need. A classical computer is just fine.
Are you referring to the Majorana equation right now, or is this a separate equation?
No. So the Majorana, if you want to make a Majorana device and you want to calculate the properties of the device that you have to fulfill, even in its full structure, 3D, etc., that's not a complicated problem. I mean, you need a big computer, and it takes time to solve it, but it's not complicated. It's not a calculation that involves a lot of interactions or a lot of entanglement. And that's what we call single particle physics. If there's no entanglement, you can basically write it as a sum of single particles in there, and then it's something that a classical computer can solve.
Because there's not that combinatorial explosion, right, of growth of parameters to track.
But then still, you need to solve the disorder level at an extreme level with basically every atom at the right position.
So trade-offs always.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you think, there's been some work, I think it was Nick Braun, who's actually our first guest, had done some work with University of Pittsburgh. I think, I can't remember the name of the PI, David Pecker, I believe, to simulate braiding on superconducting qubits. And I think there's been some other, simulation of Majorana braiding, essentially. Do you think there's any value in those types of simulations to try to understand the dynamics of the system or overcome the challenges?
No, it's very interesting. And I think you're referring to a paper that Google published a couple of months ago, where they had I think it was a circuit of 5x5 transmon qubits. And they create these special states in this 5x5 circuit. And these special states, they move around through the circuit, doing braiding, and actually also showing that they've completed these braids. And there was also a ion trap experiment by Quantum. That's not published yet. I think at least I haven't seen it anywhere. But they use 20, 30 ions, and they can do something even more complicated. They can show non-abelian statistics, and basically they show non-abelian statistics, but without error correction. So these are Majoranas or non-abelian statistics without error correction. There's no topological gap. There's no topological protection in the system. So I think you can say it's a simulation of these Majorana zero modes, but without error correction. So it's faulty, and maybe it's an very interesting step towards protected qubits. I think it is an interesting step towards protected qubits, but at the moment they're not protected. In fact, that's just work from the last few months. The Google braiding and the Quantum non-abelian. There's also very interesting stuff going on with new materials, new superconducting materials that include iron selenide-based materials, where people use STM to probe the vortices, the states inside the superconductors that show zero bias peaks. There's people put atoms, a row of atoms on a superconductor, iron atoms or whatever atoms, and they again use STM to see if there's a Majorana zero mode at the two ends of the system and where there's a gap between. And also these systems in the last few months have quite exciting results. They frequently see zero bias peaks. They also claim, and I think they have good reasons to claim, to also have a topological gap in their middle of their wire. So things are moving.
So there's room for optimism, yes.
There is room for optimism. There's room for optimism. Absolutely.
There's always room for optimism.
Yeah. But it depends a little bit on the mood of the day, right? Whether you see
of course.
helpful.
Of course. It takes a lot to maintain optimism in the face of, as you said, sort of like not being able to judge the level of the difficulty of each of the challenges or how many challenges there are. Right? Exactly. I often say we're in sort of like perfect black swan landscape because you can't tell how fat the tails are for success or failure.
Oh God.
It's all just like, a black box. We can't tell.
It also this particular area of research, again, so powerful, implications so huge, but also so daunting. It just seems so suitable. And given the history of Majorana himself, really the first discovery of an equation. Apparently, that researcher in his history, very strange. He kind of just disappeared out of nowhere. He just faded off into the mist. Nobody knows where he went. And his his mysterious end seems to somehow mirror the mysterious, difficult objective of getting to
his own zero mode.
Exactly right.
No, and I think I think the popular story is that he bought tickets for a boat from Naples to Palermo, and wasn't seen afterwards. While at the same time, Fermi called him a genius, a Class A genius. I think he said together with Newton, whereas he put Einstein and Planck and others in the second category. So,
Oh my God.
That's quite the hierarchy.
My God.
yeah. So that
Amazing.
guy Majorana, Torre Majorana, so he disappeared from the face of the earth.
Yes. Wow. Mysterious.
We're still pursuing these goals, and we have interesting experiments going on. Actually, we're going back to the original Kitaev chain idea to literally make a Kitaev chain out of individual building blocks, and putting them together, make it longer and longer, and build up the topological phase out of this chain of elements of small cells.
So despite the very difficult circumstances, there's still many frontiers worthy of pursuit on this path.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I do think that the dream topological Majorana qubit is this thing that has, inside its material properties, the protection built in.
Yes.
But that you don't have to artificially arrange it with gates and a circuit or error correction or whatever. If you can make a piece of material that has Majoranas in it and it's topologically protected, and all the fault tolerance is sort of a property, a hardware property of that system, that is still the dream goal.
That's the holy grail right there. Yes,
that is still the holy grail. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Leo. That was really, really fascinating. I feel like I know a lot more about the mysterious Majoranas. It's a fascinating topic, and
really
amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, really, really appreciate the elucidation. So, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the conversation. Thanks.
Good times. Thank you. Wow, that was so fun. Really interesting stuff. I mean, just the potential behind this, but also just the really steep hill that has to be climbed by these teams looking for the exact instantiation of what would bring about a Majorana fermion, even as a quasi-particle, right? For me, it was just a funny pairing, right? This idea that this mysterious hunt for this difficult theoretical object that has challenged so many was actually originally discovered by a theoretician who basically just disappeared into thin air.
Yes. Very strange story. Yeah, I loved it. And Leo is great at laying out sort of one of the things I always find so fascinating is the sort of family tree of a thread of R&D, right? So
no
the
doubt.
Current work that's going on in Majoranas, both it has the ancestry through the quantum spin, the quantum dots that he talked about, the boxes with electrons in them, and the 2D synthetic atoms, and recreating the periodic table just for pure science, just for pure can we do this and what does it mean? Like we're so close to that
type of open-ended scientific inquiry in quantum computing in a way that I don't think we are in any other technology that I'm aware of, where, just that open-ended, why not? Like, let's try this. What happens? We don't know. Leads to, insights that you put together into, as you said, across all these disparate teams, all these disparate efforts, all these different ideas being shared and adapted from one context to another, and getting slowly but surely closer to the end goal. It's really fascinating.
This tapestry of these competing teams, friendly but also, rivals.
Sure.
Setting themselves against some of the hardest science you could possibly imagine.
Sure.
So, man, so cool.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. So that's it for this episode. We'll be back hopefully in a couple weeks. That's what we're shooting for, with another episode. And thanks for listening. And if you would like to leave a review, we'd be very grateful.
Thanks so much.
Okay, that's it for this episode of The New Quantum Era, a podcast by Sebastian Hassinger and Kevin Rowney. Our cool theme music was composed and played by Omar Costa Hamido. Production work is done by our wonderful team over at Podfi. If you are at all like us and enjoy this rich, deep, and interesting topic, please subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you may stream from. And even consider, if you like what you've heard today, reviewing us on iTunes and or mentioning us on your preferred social media platforms. We're just trying to get the word out on this fascinating topic and would really appreciate your help spreading the word and building community. Thank you so much for your time.